have with us today Sharon Hessney. Sharon taught for a number of years in Boston as a stats teacher, as well as math teacher in the high school, secondary level. And she is currently the editor of What's Going On in This Graph with the New York Times, which is a collaboration effort between the New York Times and the American Statistical Association to get students looking at and internalizing what graphs mean. And we're very lucky to have her with us today, where she's going to be demonstrating how the activity works and taking our questions about what we can do as teachers to bring these sorts of graphs into our class. So welcome, Sharon. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Dash. Great to see you.
Amazing. So I'll let you take it away with this one. We got some amazing noticings in the chat. How, as a teacher yourself, would you now move into the what's going on in this graph question structure to talk about a graph like this?
Okay, so this is one of 4 questions we ask in what's going on with this graph. And just to give you a little bit of information on it, this is a collaboration of the New York Times, which provides the graphs. All the graphs we use have been previously published in the New York Times, and the American Statistical Association. And I'm a high school member of that organization. We came up with this idea of providing a free resource that gets students' attention about graphs that relate to them in the world and encourage students to collaborate with really low risk while learning about math and statistics. So every week on Friday, we release a new graph that's been published in the Times. And we always ask 4 questions. What do you notice? What do you wonder? How does this relate to you and your world? And create a catchy headline that captures the main idea of this graph. And that comes out on Fridays, free of charge on the Learning Network. Then on the following Wednesday, myself and another teacher, Dash has done this before, and I'm going to be asking for others who would like to be moderators, moderate live for 6 hours on students' replies on what do you notice and what do you wonder? How does this relate to you and your community? And a catchy headline. The following day, we give the reveal, and that repeats virtually every week during the school year. So that's what the program is. So would you like to see it on the website? Go for it.
Well, maybe before then, maybe we should do the rest of the process with this graph, because I'm interested to see what the wonderings are like and how this relates to us in our world for this one in particular.
Okay, so looking at the graph, what do you wonder?
And for this, instead of going in the chat, maybe some folks would be brave enough to come off of mute and share out full group. What do you wonder about this graph?
Was the question, so what I wonder, what was the question worded the same way in each country? So we're going to have an answer for that. What else do you wonder?
What's going on in those countries where less than 50% of the young people think things are getting better?
Yeah, and can you say anything about, do those countries have any similarities? Can you group them in any way? Or alternatively, group the ones where more than 50% things are getting better by generation? Is there any characteristic of the countries in a particular area?
Well, Argentina, Peru, Brazil are all in South America.
Okay. So maybe South America is not doing as well, or they don't feel it's going to be doing as well. How about the other end of the graph? What can you say about Indonesia, Zimbabwe, Ethiopia, Kenya, India, Nigeria?
I mean, those are all what we would think of as third world countries.
So this is actually, is that kind of surprising to you? That individuals and countries that are less developed have more optimism about the future? I get at least a nod. Yeah, it's kind of.
I don't know about anybody else, but yeah, that's interesting.
Okay, so this is part of a gigantic survey done of 21 countries by the UN. okay? And Gallup did the survey. It's the first time that they've ever looked at the difference in gap between adults and teenagers, okay? And they asked 37 questions. Yes, the same questions everywhere. They did stratified random samples, and we'll see that later. So the technique is rather good. And they come up with this incredible surprise that less developed countries, there seems to be more optimism than more developed countries. And when I think about how I pick the graphs, now we have now had 149 releases. We've been publishing for the last 6 years, okay? And the criteria for selecting a graph is students have to see themselves in the graph. And of course, where do they see themselves here? Right there with the United States, okay? Okay, and no one commented yet about where the United States is in comparison to other countries. They have to learn about the world around them, other countries. It has to be timely. It was done a year ago. And lastly, a surprise. A graph is interesting if it has a surprise. And we did have, in the course of responding to this graph, a student from Indonesia who responded to why there's that kind of optimism in Indonesia. So that was kind of interesting. Okay, anything else you wonder about in the graph?
What did that student say? I'm just curious.
You know, things are getting better, basically is what they said. And then other students got to read that. So one of the things about what's going on with this graph is we're now averaging between 300 and 900 responses a week. And the responses come from all over the world, but mostly the United States. And students get to respond to each other, which is really, really interesting, as well as teachers responding to other students.
So some wonderings from the chat. People are wondering a lot about potential sampling bias here, which we can tell we're among stats teachers. Was the wording the same in each country? What kind of sampling method was done? What were the sample sizes in each country? How were these countries selected? These sorts of study design things.
Okay, so that's a really good wonder, and we're going to see that in a certain respect answered in the reveal, which we'll get later. Okay, so how does this relate to you and your community?
Yeah, we want to come up, new voice come up with you. How does this relate to you and your community?
I mean, I think one of the things is you see United States on here, and in general, the teenagers seem to be relatively optimistic, and the parents don't seem to be. And what other countries are like that? Ukraine. Of course, this was done before the war started. Okay, Japan, Germany. Okay, other than Ukraine, Germany and Japan, very developed countries. Okay, why is that? And I think that would be worthy of a discussion in class. And then the last thing is come up with a catchy title that captures the main idea of the graph, but let's do that afterwards. Okay, I think a good thing to do right now is to look at the website. And so here goes. We're gonna and show you how to use it. So all you have to do is type in.
I don't think we can actually see the website yet.
Oh, I haven't started. Sorry. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay. We got it. We good?
Yes.
Okay. So all you have to do is type in what's going on with this graph. Okay. And it'll take you to the New York Times. And there we go. And that's the home page for what's going on with this graph. So there are a couple resources up at the top. as you can see here. We've got some collections of various kinds of graphs. Here, let's go back again. Okay, here's a 3-minute video on how to use the website. And we're going to go down to the graph on international optimism. Notice they're in reverse chronological order, with the last graph being the length of baseball games. We always try to do something seasonal at the end of the year, but the one right before that is sex education by state. And we're going to go down to the graph we were using. Okay, international optimism on February 3rd, 2022. Okay, and here's the graph that we just saw. And then underneath are the 4 questions. What do you notice? What do you wonder? How does this relate to you and your community? And what's going on with this graph? And we can ask students to go online and respond, but quite frankly, students probably do, teachers more often than not have students respond in class. Now, the way it's usually done is, the best practices is the graph is shared, students talk in pairs, they talk as a whole group, and by building on each other's understanding, they get more in-depth understanding. But here goes. We had 341 responses. So just click on that. And you can see that the most recent one was June 3rd. So these graphs are in the archives and you can always respond. And even though this was months before, you can see that there have been some that have been even more recently. And the way the students respond is up in the comments section. You just type in your response. And you can see that I'm already listed as moderator Sharon, but if someone has never responded before, they just put in their name and their location. And then there's this little box below that if you check this off, the person who puts in the response will get an email that'll give them a link to their response, which is great for them to go back and see if any other students have responded to them, or if I've responded, or as a teacher, if you want to read your students' responses, you can go back to the link. You just hit submit and you're done.
Amazing.
So,
one quick question that came up in the chat. Is this unlimited access, or do you need a subscription to New York Times to participate in the comments?
It's completely free. So as a teacher, the best way to know about what's going on with this graph is to subscribe to the newsletter. So if you just put in New York Times Learning Network, because it's part of the Learning Network, okay, newsletter, then on every week on Friday morning, you'll get a list of all the features they have. They have about 25 features a week. We're just one of them, but we're usually up in the top. And then from there, you'll see what's available, okay? Alternatively, you can always go and see what's the newest one, but it's completely free. Not only that, all the links you're gonna see are free. So that includes the article and any other articles that we may refer to. So the comments are, you can get newest or oldest. We can go to oldest. Dash, were there any other questions before I go on with the comments?
No, just a comment that teachers like free. So that's great.
Yeah, everything is free. Okay. The article, the articles, and all the links to all the other articles.
One sub question is to make an account so that you can comment. You don't need a subscription account, right? It's just you gotta put your name in. Okay.
No. Right. They just want your name, and you'll hear me a couple times. Maybe I'll mention that I talked to a teacher whose students responded, and the way I do that is I can name of the student and where they come. Now there's an awful lot of Louises in Texas. This is probably not going to be too helpful, but that's how I know where the schools are. So you can see here that Luis responded before we started moderating, and I responded to Luis. Okay. There are a couple more responses here. Let's just go like.
And as a reminder, what days and times are there moderators on and responding to comments?
Okay, so it gets released on Friday. but it's Wednesday mornings from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern time that we respond. And we respond to as many as we possibly can. It's a stratified random sample. That's our method. So not necessarily to the best ones or the longest ones. But here you get an idea of all of the students who've responded, okay? And we respond to them and they respond back and forth. It doesn't seem right here that I've got too many that responded to each other. There we go, okay. So there's a student with someone who's responded to each other. It's, this was done at the beginning of the school year, and as the year progressed, we had more and more students responding to each other.
Amazing. And to my understanding, the graphs are only released from like September to May, the school year months. Is that correct?
That's right. But the archives is always open. So you can always go back and look at other graphs. And I'll get to you later, but there are indices of all the graphs and all the releases by topic, by type of graph, and by statistical or math content. And so you can go back and you can pull out a graph from previously and use that. So here's the graph. And then, as I said, the day after we moderate, we have a reveal. So there are a couple components, the reveal. And as a teacher, I really appreciate a couple things. One is what we write is very brief. Secondly, it's the same format every single week. So you know what you're gonna get, and you know where you're gonna get it. So here goes. We did this in February. It came from an article that was in November. So here's the article, which you get free. It was part of Upshot, which is part of the New York Times. And look at the headline. Where are young people most optimistic? In the poorer countries. So, okay, this is what it's actually going to talk about. You can see that they're going to interview these students, okay? And it says it came from a very large survey of 21 countries. So you can click on this or you can get the survey, or alternatively, here's another link to the same survey. The one that was in the article was animated and actually pretty difficult to read, but I wanted to show you this one. This is the actual study. They asked 37 questions, 21 countries, and it's full of here we go. All kinds of graphs, okay, the varying ages of countries. I think the first set is going to be, I thought it was going to be on the internet, but it isn't. Okay. Oh, yeah, it is on the internet. Okay. So percentage of students using internet every day, all kinds of things, and kind of also a very good way to learn how to use different kinds of graphs. This is a really challenging one there, but you've never seen a graph like that. Anyway, so it happens to be in the study. In addition, at the end, for each of the countries, they tell you how they did the survey. And I think one of the very interesting assignments could be to assign different countries to different students and have them do an investigation of how the survey was done and what the responses were. So that comes out of there as well.
Amazing. So the release, which is at least the Friday after, is that where all these questions from our very precocious set of students here about all the different ways that sampling bias might creep into making a graph like this, is that where we would find all that information is in that summary release after the moderation period?
Yeah. So, okay. So what you're going to see, I'll keep going down. You'll see it towards the end. So here are the student headlines that we got, and we publish a couple of the best ones every week. Rumor has it that students go immediately here to see if they got published. So we've got the opposing futures in the eyes of different generations, the ages of optimism. Is each generation making the world better? So we list those. And then we give you a bunch of additional questions that you may want to have your students answer. This one relates to The first one relates to what can you say about the countries above the line, below the line, and on the line? Okay. There happen to have been 2 questions that are similar in the study. We give you both of those and ask the students, well, what's the difference? And then the last part of every one of the reveals are what are called the stat nuggets. So these are statistical and mathematical terms that you find in the graph and where you find them. And the explanations are written in very direct language, as if it were being written for, let's say, a humanities teacher rather than a math teacher. So we have about scatter plot, we have y equals x, and here, this answers your question, Dash. Okay, here's an action. They were all done by stratified random samples, which I wouldn't expect all students to know about. So here's an explanation of a stratified random sample. And here's an explanation of how it was done in the study, and then a link to where it was. So you can
that's
use
so
it.
amazing. You know, as an AP stats teacher, that's just gold. Absolute.
Yeah.
It's a golden nugget, not just a stat nugget. As you said, it's amazing.
Okay,
and
so
we always talk about stratified random samples, but it's usually in the set of activities where you have to like do it in a very precise way, but to see it applied in a real world setting like this, it's just amazing.
yeah, I know, by Gallup for the United Nations, no less, right?
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so here goes. At the end, we say you can view our archives to get all past releases. So you can get it by topic. We can go back to that, by graph type or by stat nugget. So here goes. So let's say you're doing data collection. Okay, so we've got stat nuggets that have to do with variables, statistics, distributions. Oh my goodness, there's data collection. So here's a whole bunch of topics that are covered in in the various graphs that specifically have to do with data collection. And here's stratified random sample. And in fact, it was in 3 different ones. So you could look at other ones, not just the global optimism. Okay, and you can do this for any of the stat nuggets. So here goes, let's go back here. Margin of error, confidence intervals. So how about doing a confidence interval on pro college athletes? And this is whether they should be paid or not. That's what that one's particular one is about. So all you have to do is click on it. There you go. I'm not there. Okay, there's the graph. Okay. Do you think colleges should pay their athletes? And you can use that to teach confidence intervals, because that's how the data is explained here. And then down below.
Wonderful. I just shared the link, by the way, to the graphs organized by stat topic for all participants. I've also shared the link in the chat to the newsletter and a couple other things that Sharon shared, in case you haven't checked out the chat yet. One question is there any filtering by like grade level or level of mathematics?
No. So here goes. Let me tell you a couple stories on this one. Okay. The New York Times really believes that you never say this is only for certain grade levels. So we do get some middle school students to respond, and we do get college students, and once in a while we get elementary school students to respond. What is interesting is because students respond together, the typical, your zip code does not determine who you learn with. Your age and educational level does not determine who you learn with. So towards the last 2 months of this year, there was a high school in Perth Amboy that was responding every single week. And there were statistics students at San Luis Obispo in California who were taking a statistics communication course. And they were responding every week. And the last 6 weeks or so, the high school kids and the college kids were responding to each other. So, I mean, does it get better than that?
That's
So,
beautiful. And across geography, no less. That's amazing.
yes, exactly. So no, there is no division. There are obviously some graphs that are less appropriate for certain ages. So the sex education one, which if we go back,
Yeah, so that's actually a perpetual topic of discussion among statistics teachers, especially those and teachers of all subjects who want to involve real world data is what's your best advice for teachers knowing which graphs to choose and which contexts are going to be appropriate for their students, and also maybe some contexts that are important and they know that students would benefit from as critically thinking citizens of tackling, but worried about where discussions might lead. What's your best advice for approaching those?
okay, so let me just a couple things when I pick the graphs. I pick the graphs because students can see themselves and there's a surprise. It's about the world and it's timely. But I also pick graphs that I feel relate to the students that the teachers are likely to use. And if there's a particular week that you feel that the graph is inappropriate, then you kind of have two options. You can just wait till the next week, because I guarantee the next graph will be a different kind of graph, a different topic, and a different level of difficulty. And the second thing is you can go into the archives and pick something else. Okay. Now, sex education, this was one really going out on a limb a little, but it was a phenomenal graph because what it was about was the colors designate in this graph here, designate which states basically prohibit abortion and don't prohibit abortion, and then telling you by the lines around them whether they mandate that abstinence be taught. Okay, so it was a very, very interesting kind of graph. If that's not appropriate, you can do this one, 2 weeks before, the price of eggs during Easter. Why did they go up so much? Okay, or the one before that, someone asked about physics. No, we have not had any physics graphs. I can tell you that conclusively, but this is a geology one. So this is about the Anthropocene, whether there's going to be an additional geological period, the Anthropocene. And in today's New York Times, it was announced that the Anthropocene epoch has been approved by geologists. So here goes. This is the graph, which we did in March.
I'd say that's exponential growth. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and we picked it for exponential growth. Okay, and the questions relate to exponential growth. And yeah.
One curiosity I have, Sharon, is, and by the way, we're doing a Q&A format. So I'm starting off with some questions that were pre-submitted and also ones I've seen in the chat. But as questions come up, please feel free to type them in the chat, either full group or to me, and I'll try and voice them as we go along. And then we'll open it up to the full group at the end. You were asking some questions in the rich versus developing nations and the happiness scales graph that seem to be causal questions. Like, why is it the case that developing nations tend to have more optimism among the younger generation? And that's the kind of thing where there could be multiple possible explanations of what's causing that may not be answered by the graph alone. So what resources would teachers have and students have for looking into potential causal explanations for that, like the story behind it? What's out there for that?
So, yeah, so there's two places. One is the article, because as you remember, you saw the faces of all the people they interviewed. So the article is going to try to give an explanation. And the other is you can go back to the study. And the study itself actually talks about it and also gives you all the questions around it. So if we can go back to the article, I didn't show you this. This happens to be a very rich article. There are two other graphs that are in this article. So how 15 to 24-year-olds think children today will compare with their parents economically. Okay, segmented bar graph. This is the one we used. And this one, okay, actually appears as another what's going on with this graph 2 weeks later, which is what young people think is the most important factor in determining success: education, hard work, or connections. Okay, so these are part of that same chapter in the United Nations report. So that's another place you can go back to. But you've always got the article to go back to for answering questions.
Amazing. And one question that just came in the chat, are there any interactive graphs that what's going on in this graph does, like things that students can click on and drag around or input numbers into?
Absolutely. Absolutely there are. There are many. And so we give you the static graph in the release, okay? But we give you the connection to the interactive one. And those are very important. The Times has been doing that a lot, where you can click on and you can see which countries they are or what happens when you change something. So there are interactive graphs, yes.
Amazing. Another question that I got as a private message was, how do you recommend we fit this into our normal classroom structure? So say that, like, I'm an Algebra 2 teacher, I cover, polynomial division up the wazoo in April, and I got time before the standardized test. Like, how do I fit this in? Because I know it's important for my students to become good data interpreters in a way that's going to be seamless with how I already am running my class.
Okay, well, a couple things to add to that. So we use a strategy, what do you notice, what do you wonder, which comes from Annie Fetter. And it's a phenomenal strategy because it has low floor, high ceiling. Everyone can start somewhere. You can look at this graph, say it has a line, it has points, there are points above, there are points below. If you use what's going on with this graph, you can start integrating the strategy into the rest of your classroom. Okay, but let me get back to the original question. The usual way that teachers do this is they do it at the beginning of class, and they put up the graph and they have their students to each other in groups, their table groups or groups of two, and ask them, what did they notice? And then they just go around the room getting one answer after another, where the students realize that they can build on each other's answers. Okay. And then they'll say, okay, so what do you wonder? Because it usually gets in more depth. And they go back and forth in the classroom. Teachers say that they can do that within 15 minutes. Okay. It'll take a little bit longer at the beginning of the year, but can be done under 15 minutes as you get really good at that. They then, if they want to, can assign, well, how does this relate to you and your community? Come up with a catchy headline. They can say, I want you to reply online, send me the link, and do that outside of class. But they get, what do you notice? What do you wonder done in the classroom? Now, like I said, if you introduce the concept of noticing and wondering, you can use it in other things. So you're learning quadratic. So this is y equals x squared. Now you show them another parabola and you say, well, how did it move to the left? How did it move up? How did it become wider? What I noticed, and you go through that for other aspects. So you get more legs on what's going on with this graph by just introducing that strategy of what do you notice? What do you wonder? The other thing is, I guarantee after students do a graph, something like this, or any of the ones we pick, because we always pick ones that they can see themselves, that when they leave the classroom, they're still thinking about it. Okay. And isn't that what you want more than anything? You've grabbed their attention, they're focused in class, they're learning, noticing and wonder, and they're still thinking about it. And this, I think really makes it so worthwhile. But bottom line is 15 minutes at the beginning of the class if you want to.
Amazing. So it sounds like it can be efficient, and also students are going to walk away with some habits of mind that they can take with them to other sorts of math or other even discipline tasks in school.
Yeah, and
that's really cool.
Yeah, and other content.
Yeah,
other content. I mean,
trying to my best effort to try and get you in trouble here. There's one version of that answer where we say, okay, you can do it very quickly. It's going to transfer to the stuff you need to do in your math class. In your mind, why is it the case that stuff like this, where we have students open-endedly exploring data visualizations, is not the kind of thing that we focus on in our math courses, that are not really embedded into our standards? It's mostly algebraic manipulation and procedures rather than the sort of critical analysis tasks that might be more beneficial to future citizens. How did that happen, and what do you think we can do about it to change our standards such that this is really embedded?
Okay. Wow. Because it's hard. And if you go through, if you look at the archives, and we just kind of go through and you look at all these graphs, and they're all different. I mean, there's no two in here, and none of them look like that. What's your favorite ice cream flavor? Chocolate, vanilla, or strawberry, right? Give me a graph of your height and weight. They all look different. With this one probably being the most difficult one ever we did. This is on Olympic medals. But let me compare it to an English class. So how do you learn to read poetry? I mean, being someone who was very mathy, that was always a real challenge to me. Well, an English teacher gets you to learn how to read poetry by reading a lot of poems. And when you read a lot of poems, you get better and better. There is no one way to read poems. And in a certain respect, there's no one way to read graphs. Okay. There's not a set of rules we can tell you. Okay. And you get good at it by practice. Oh, I never noticed that. Oh, I need to think about that. Maybe if I look at it a different way, this seems similar to one that I've seen before. Okay. So the practice is what gets you really good at it. I like this story. Starting in the second year, we've had a Catholic girls' school in New Jersey who's responded every single week. And so I approached the teacher. The name of the school was there, and I found who the teacher was. I said, oh, the person's probably in the math department. Well, no, the person wasn't in the math department. The person was in the history department and taught AP government. And he's been doing it now for 5 years with his students every single week. And I said to him, why do you do this? And he says, because I'm trying to teach my students claim and evidence. And I'll tell you, they start at the beginning of the year, they know no statistics. Their answers get better and better. And the last week, about 3 years ago, we had a graph on contract wages. It was a scatter plot, contract wages, and a statistic called WAR, which is wins above rookie, which we explained to you is basically how much better you are than a rookie. And a baseball graph, it's the end of the year, maybe a little intimidating. What is WAR? And one of his students writes in, I know nothing about baseball. I hate baseball. But this is what's going on with the graph. And to excuse a pun, she hit it out of the park. She got every single bit of it. So that's what you learn. And it takes a while. It takes a while. Now, if I can just go a little longer, are these gorgeous or are these gorgeous? I just really had to. This is a graph about when countries win Olympic medals, gold, silver, bronze. What if, so which country wins, quote unquote, wins? Let's say all the medals have 1 point apiece, they're evenly weighted. which one would win. Let's say a gold is 10 points, a silver is 5, and a bronze is 1 point. Which team would win? This is basically linear programming here. This shows you where different countries would come in based on that. Well, one of the best answers we got for this graph came from a middle school class. No, I just cannot believe that. How did that possibly happen? Okay, so it wasn't that they were that good about graphs, but the teacher said, they were from Idaho, that during COVID, they turned the TVs on and had the kids watch TV, so they'd behave in the cafeteria when they weren't supposed to be talking to each other. And they had watched the entire Olympics in the cafeteria on TV. And they knew about this issue of the weighting of the medals. And they got this graph completely. So much by age, so much by difficulty. But the more you do it, whether it's the content or it's the kind of graph or it's the kind of statistics, the better you get at it. And it becomes a game. You know, what is the surprise in this particular graph? I bet on global success, you wondered about that one. Which country thinks its education is the most important thing? And what does the US think? Are you surprised that the US thinks that family, wealth, and connections is the most important thing?
By the way, this the story of the middle schooler is having the contextual connection to be able to make those insightful points is amazing. And also just the questions this brings up, the connection to current events, as Julie mentioned. It's just, I think there's just so many avenues we can go with these graphs, and it's really incredible, this resource that you're providing. We've covered most of the pre-submitted questions as well as questions in the chat. By the way, I posted links to all the organizations, including organization by topic, by type of graph, and by statistical concept. One great comment in the chat so far has been from Kim that maybe we could take these graphs and put them into Desmos so that live you can get students responding to them, and then you can anonymize them and show everyone their responses all simultaneously. I think that's an amazing strategy.
And for 6 months, we actually had them in Desmos. So you can go back, if you look at graphs in the index, you'll see it there. And I think that, you know, and you've got the 4 questions. So I think that's a fantastic idea.
Wow. Do you still offer that or no?
No, we can't. No, there was copyright issues.
That's always fun.
But you can do it. I mean, the format is really pretty straightforward, right? There's 4 questions.
Yeah. And by the way, if you want a little tutorial, I can stay around after we're done with our hour-long session and stick around if you want to see how you might control Desmos to make that happen. So a couple of questions that have been coming in. Well, I'd like to stop talking myself for a bit and really open up the floor. Would anyone like to come off mute and directly ask Sharon any questions that you've been wondering about as we've been going through the session together?
Anything coming? If not, I can, 2 things I'd like to say.
Give it a little longer. We're going to use our teacher wait time.
That's right, teacher wait time.
This isn't really a question, but this past year I taught an explorations class into data science. And so we started almost every class with something like this, a graph, and then it was, what do you see? What do you think? And then what story is this graph trying to tell? Those were the 3 questions. And you are 100% correct that at the beginning, it's a little bit awkward almost every day, but they do get better at it even within a session. Within one period, they get better. And then the next day, they're a little bit better and a little bit freer with their commentary. And they get to where they're showing their insights. They're thinking more than they did at the beginning, which is exciting to see.
Yeah, absolutely. here, I wanted to show you something here that we do pretty often. So sometimes there's some real important things that are happening in the news that kids are thinking about. So how about the train derailments? Remember that in Ohio? That was pretty upsetting. So we had the graph on train derailments. Okay. The earthquake in Turkey. I mean, I think that was something that some kids were really thinking about. Okay. And then here's LeBron James becomes the career scoring leader. Okay. Also something that they were thinking about. It doesn't always have to be disaster. Bringing things that they are maybe hearing about that makes them sit up at the beginning of class and take notice. And then you've got their attention for the rest of the period.
Yeah. And what would you say to, so one pre-submitted question that we haven't gotten to yet is, how do I, as a teacher, facilitate this sort of activity with students of different math levels in my classroom? I think that also applies to how I do this with students of different contextual knowledge, like background knowledge, and like, say, you don't follow basketball at all, and so you have no context around who LeBron James is. How do you take those prior knowledge sets and facilitate still productive conversations as a teacher?
I think you let it happen. Okay. I mean, the LeBron James one looks a lot like the baseball one in a way. It takes a while to come out. 1 second. He's clearly above everybody else, and I have no idea who Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is, Okay. So students, they'll be listening to each other, they'll be bringing out different things. Sometimes on the what do you notice, what do you wonder, you literally just go around the room and let the students say, oh, there are a bunch of step lines here. Some lines are greater than others. Okay, I notice that the x-axis is not years, but age. That is really, really interesting. Okay, and they'll be looking for something that's different. The graphs give the ability usually of people of different contexts and different abilities. But let me tell you, let's see. This one less so than others. If the graph, this one probably has it, that Anthropocene, is a context that we think maybe the students will not know much about, we'll give it to them. So here we say, this is about Anthropocene. Geology is the history of the earth, especially as recorded in rocks. Sometimes scientists believe that they're in a new period of geological time. Anthropocene characterized by human-induced planetary scale changes that are unfinished, but very much underway. So we'll give, if we think it's probably not the context that students understand or have knowledge of, we'll give it to them. And you're expected, when you look at the graph, to at least read what the title is, look at the graph, and we really do hope that the teacher will give the information that we give underneath. We're not giving away the graph, we're just giving the context. So that helps.
Sorry, I was muted. That's amazing. And one last question that was submitted before I ask you how we as teachers can get involved is, I think especially as math teachers, we're used to teaching things very linearly. Like, okay, here's how you solve a one-step equation. Here's how you solve a two-step equation. Here's the rules behind this. But it seems like there are no rules here. There are maybe general principles of like best practices for analyzing a graph, but each of these are so different that it seems like it's more habits of mind and general guidance that we can teach rather than like specific procedures and tools. So what would be your best advice on how we go about getting students to learn those general principles and guidance and to really internalize them I know that you said before it was a matter of just practice, 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 but is there anything else we can do to make that more explicit?
Well, it's obviously getting away from what is the title, what is on the x-axis, what is on the y-axis. Okay, it's definitely getting away. And if your student says, this is what's on the x-axis, fine. It's definitely encouraging your students to use all parts of the graph and all information that's available. Okay, so are they taking into account now, on the sex education one is linked incorrectly by the New York Times. That's why I keep going back to it. Oh dear. Here we go. Let's see on the earthquake ones if we've got something. It is not cheating. It'll take a second to come up. To read, so you got the x-axis, the y-axis, you've got the title, okay? You've got an explanation of the circles here. Make sure you read that, okay? But we've also got these descriptions right here, okay? So magnitudes, so Armenia, okay, that's telling you where it is. 1988, okay, I can see that's kind of above 1988, okay. Magnitude 6.8, okay, that's reading off the y-axis. Estimated death toll, 25,000 plus. Size of the circle. That is not cheating to read whatever we're giving you. So don't ignore any information that's there. And once a student looks at this and says, gee, I wonder how many people died in each of the earthquakes. And the guy next to him says, oh, look at it. The circle is how many died. Now we can tell. Now he knows you got to read every piece of it. Okay. It's kind of a practice, just like with poetry.
Nice. And we're in our last minute here. So I'd love to just ask, how can we as teachers get involved in this? Like, okay, say we want to moderate, say we want to do this for our class, what can we do? Okay, so this is my advertisement. So just having spent the last hour learning about what's going on with this graph, knowing that you can use it in your classroom, you can use any graph you have in the same format of what do you notice, what do you wonder, you are hereby qualified to become a moderator for what's going on with this graph. What does that entail? That entails 2.5 hours on one Wednesday during the school year, preferably between 11:30 and 2 o'clock Eastern time, but it can be adjusted, okay? And reading several drafts of the release and the reveal. Dash has been a moderator. We have them from all over the country and from 4 countries now outside. So if you're interested, Dash will put my email into the chat, okay? And please let me know and I'll get in touch with you and talk about becoming a moderator. Great, I'm putting your email in the chat right now, and let me just double stamp. Sharon has not paid me to say this. I've been a moderator and it is so much fun. You just get all these responses coming in the comments from all over the world, and you can tell from all different age groups, and just such amazing perspectives, things that you didn't even notice in these graphs, these catchy headlines that students are coming up with. And it's an absolute blast. And it's, 1 few hour period a year. It's just like a nice little break, and just to look at graphs with students all over the world. It's amazing. So I really recommend it. And let me also just say, to wrap up here, that what's going on in this graph features didn't happen by accident at the New York Times. Sharon, who's a legendary stats and math educator, and the American Statistical Association have been pushed for this and have made it happen, and have been executing on it for a number of years now. And so we all owe them a debt and our gratitude. So thank you, Sharon, so much for all that you do and for being here with us. Really appreciate it. Here you are. There's no flaws here on the Zoom.
It wouldn't be possible without all the teachers to put it in front of their students. So thank you very much if you've shown it to your students. I really feel it's great to make students skeptical of graphs, but not cynical.
And thank you all so much for being here. I know it's July and it's summertime. The fact that you all are taking time out of your summer to learn some new things and to learn more about this is amazing. I really appreciate your time and being here.